You are listening to Strange Frequencies Radio. I am Jason Corbis, and of course sitting next to me here is Bobby Nelson. StrangeFrequenciesRadio.wordpress.com is the site. Facebook.com/StrangeFrequenciesRadio is the Facebook page, and you can find all kinds of other stuff on our website. We're dedicating the entire show today to the JFK assassination.
I think we should probably start off by saying that both of us, you and I, are we believe that JFK was assassinated solely by Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's what I think, yeah.
Yes.
And I think there's evidence and a good deal of logic and reason to back that up. And we're going to get into tons of conspiracy theories because there's a lot. I've heard some just over the last few days that I have never heard before. Mm-hmm. We're in the minority as far as the lone gunman idea,
which is
Oswald
insane
thing.
To me.
It's crazy to me too. But yeah, it is the truth. I mean, the fact is that the idea that there was a conspiracy is at its lowest point ever, since the time. It's like 61% or something like that now, I think, to recent polls. 61% believe and there was some type of conspiracy. So we're in the minority here. But the truth is that the people who believe in the conspiracy, they do seem to be growing less and less every year. I don't know if it's because the people who were older at the time are starting to die. I don't know if that's the case or if people are just getting off the idea that, grand conspiracies exist. I would doubt that's the truth because there's still people who believe in a assorted other number of conspiracy theories. But
when my father went to college in the 70s, he said he was overly obsessed with the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. He believed that there was a big conspiracy. He doesn't anymore. He's in the minority.
Oh, okay.
He thinks that Oswald. I mean, the evidence is just overwhelming.
To continue our discussion tonight, we're pleased to welcome Gerald Posner to the show. Posner is an award-winning investigative journalist and the author of many books on public figures and world events, including, of course, the Pulitzer Prize finalist Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Assassination of JFK. Now available as an ebook for the first time ever, Case Closed has been called by many to be the definitive look at the Kennedy assassination and debunking the conspiracy theories which it spawned. For more information on Posner and his work, please check out his website. That's www.posner, that's Posner, www.posner.com. Gerald Posner, thanks for joining us tonight.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Jason, for having me on.
Of course, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you a question that we kind of ruminated on a little bit about in the first hour, and that was the idea that here we are 50 years later just about, and the conspiracy theories don't seem to really be going away. The conspiracies, I get the idea that there was a conspiracy seems to be lessening in popularity, but it doesn't seem to really be going away anytime soon. It's not dying out. Why do you think that this particular conspiracy, that there was multiple people involved in the JFK assassination, that Oswald didn't act alone, or maybe that he was even just a patsy for who knows who, why is that one so intriguing to people? What makes them hold on to this?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of reasons beyond just the fact that a lot of people love conspiracies in general, as you two both know. Sort of non-skeptical thinkers embrace conspiracies because they seem to be a better way to explain events that they can't quite understand, and they take away the randomness of life. But I think that in the Kennedy assassination in particular, the biggest reason why they continue to persist is Jack Ruby. I mean, the fact that Oswald never had a day in court, the evidence was never presented against him in a public forum so that people were able to digest it and then talk about it years later. I mean, if Oswald today, he'd be turning 74, he'd be 74 years old. If he was sitting in prison for 50 years and saying, "Oh no, I didn't do it," like James Earl Ray did in the King assassination,
right,
a few people would listen to him, but most would dismiss it. But once a nightclub owner, a wannabe gangster, 2 days later kills the alleged assassin as he was then in police custody, you're off and running. And there's plenty that's strange enough about the case. Clearly, the ballistics in that, until you examine them, can throw somebody off. And I think that in the 60s, people also started to embrace a loss of trust in government between Vietnam, Watergate, Iran-Contra. They thought the government lied to them about big events and plotted against their best interests. And then lastly, I think Oliver Stone. Look, I mean, he's a terrible historian, but he's a good filmmaker.
Right, absolutely.
In 91, JFK sort of energized in a couple of hours every canard about the assassination in a very effective film and repackaged it for a new generation.
Right. Earlier, and you're talking about Jack Ruby, and I asked Jason in the first hour, and I still have no idea. Does Jack Ruby, or did he actually have any type of mafia connections whatsoever, or is that just something that spawned with the conspiracies?
No, it's interesting. It spawned with the conspiracies. It's one of the canards of the assassination is that Ruby, in fact, was a gangster. I mean, I just was part of a panel discussion a week ago in Las Vegas at the Mob Museum, the appropriately named Mob Museum, and one of the other authors who thinks that actually both Kennedy assassinations are tied together, and that Sirhan was part of a hypnosis program, and that's why he was a Manchurian candidate, all these types of things. Just says it as a matter of fact that Ruby wasn't a gangster, and as though if he says it enough times, it will become true. But what it actually is Ruby was the type of person that cops see all the time in New Jersey. They see them out in the Midwest. They see these guys in Philadelphia. They're wannabes. They're guys who would like to be somebody. He would have loved to have been a gangster, a mobster, a tough guy. He was a guy who broke the law repeatedly, had a violent temper, who acted as his own bouncer in his club. But what was interesting is that the FBI had placed wiretaps in the headquarters of the Chicago Mafia. Sam Giancana, the big head of the Chicago Mafia, they had placed them in before the assassination. They ran them for 5 years over a period of time. Once in a while, the mob would say, by the way, you think anyone's listening to our conversations? And they would sweep the place. And when the FBI knew they were going to sweep it, they would break back in, take the taps out. Wow. Once it was swept, they'd put them back in. So they were listening to what I call virgin conversations of the top mobsters in Chicago over this period. And what is clear is that when Ruby shot Oswald, these guys were talking to each other in their headquarters as though they didn't think anybody else was listening, and they didn't know who Ruby was. He just wasn't part of their agenda. And if Chicago didn't know him, that's where he's from, and nobody else knew him. He wasn't coming out of there as a mobster.
Oh, excellent point. So let's make the case then for Oswald, because clearly that's what your book, Case Closed, makes the case for. I know that we're talking about conspiracy theories here, and both of us are firmly in the camp that Oswald did this, that he acted alone, lone gunman, all that kind of stuff. So let's just start with what we talked about earlier on the show, which was that we've heard people, even to this day, even deny the idea that Oswald could have even made the shot. He wasn't capable. Now, our argument is basically that, yes, here he was designated as a marksman, as a sharpshooter at times in his life. I'm not saying he was an amazing shot, but he was certainly capable of making the shot.
Yeah.
You can take it from there.
I think, you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of, before we get to Oswald's life or, the why of the assassination, in terms of can he make the shot, the answer to that in some ways is, well, he did. So people want to say, well, it was a hard shot. He would have missed 99 times and only made it once. Well, he made the one because he pulled off the assassination that day. And he was, as you said a moment ago, he wasn't good at many things in his life. He wasn't good in the Marines, where he was court-martialed twice, once for, shooting himself with a Derringer they didn't know he had, another time punching an officer in the face. His fellow Marines thought he was gay. They threw him in the shower, called him Mrs. Oswald. Wow. He was studying Russian. They thought he was an odd guy, but he was good at one thing, and that was when he was on the firing range. When he went into the Marines, he got the second highest score they had in terms of being a sharpshooter, 212. That means he can hit a 10-inch target from 200 yards 8 times out of 10. Wow. And then when he left the Marines and he was really dissatisfied with them, he's thinking of defecting to Russia, he can't stand them, he still got on the range, and in his bad attitude, still got a marksman score of 191. So he's good with a rifle. And the rifle that he had, we often hear people say, and the two of you know this, it was a terrible rifle, it was a cheap rifle. Yeah. It was a cheap rifle, but it was a good killing rifle. It was an Italian carbine, military rifle. The bullet was a full metal-jacketed bullet. Those things came in after World War I, because in World War I, bullets didn't have a full metal jacket, so then when they hit somebody, they would splinter and often kill them. So the design of a full metal jacket was the Geneva Accords. They put them that way so that they would go through somebody. A bullet would keep intact, go right through you, wound another person, and that was actually worse for the enemy, because there's nothing that slows the enemy down as if they have a lot of wounded to take care of.
Certainly.
So that bullet is like a flying drill. It's a 165-grain full jacketed bullet that travels as fast as an AK-47 up to about 2,100 feet a second when it gets going. So, the question as to whether Oswald could make those shots that day, there's no doubt in the time that he had. You know that in Case Closed, I talk about how he had more time than the Warren Commission thought. They had the sequence of shots wrong. We could talk about that later. But I think the key is this. For me, when I think of this, Bobby, and I think of it, Jason, even if you are capable of making the shot, you have the technical capability. Oswald you've got to give him the credit, and I don't mean credit to say, oh, he's a good thing, but credit in terms of the acknowledgement of that feat that day, because even if he thought about killing somebody, he thought obviously about killing this right-wing Army General, Edwin Walker. He tried to kill him in the spring. He thought that would be his contribution to history, and the bullet got deflected by a window frame, and he didn't kill Walker. Now he's put himself in the window of the book depository where he works. He's read a few days before that the president's coming around. When the president finally comes around that corner and he sees this person that he's seen only on television before coming at him in the limousine with Jackie there in the pink outfit and her pink pillbox hat, and his adrenaline has to be pumping. His heart has to be up near his throat. And as that car makes the turn in front of the building, makes that left turn to head away from him, and he knows he's going to take the shots, there are a lot of shooters that would have lost their nerve, that might have missed because they were too nervous, and he does miss the first shot entirely. Makes sense that he does. That's the height of his nerves. That shot misses the car, probably deflected by a tree, hits a curbstone hundreds of feet out from the depository. He gets 3.5 seconds, recocks the bolt, aims again, looks through, fires. That's not a fatal shot. Hits Kennedy in the high neck, rear shoulder. That's the so-called magic bullet that goes on to hit the governor. And then he has a full 5 seconds for the last shot. And that's the shot in which the driver of the car, the oldest member of the security detail that day, William Greer, turns around, is looking at the president because he's heard all the commotion before. He slows the limousine up, which had been going about 10 to 12 miles an hour, down to 5 to 6 miles an hour. Kennedy's propped up from the back brace that he's wearing that's underneath his chest all the way down to his waist. And Oswald gets the clear, dead, straight-on shot and still almost misses. Hits him high in the right rear portion of the head, an inch and a half higher, and we're talking about an attempted assassination.
Yeah.
But he makes that shot, and, we now know that if Hinckley was an inch and a half over, Reagan would be dead. That's the difference sometimes between a successful or unsuccessful assassination, a matter of inches.
That's a good point. So you mentioned about the time frame it would have taken for Oswald to make these shots. I see a lot of people when they're doing the reenactments, they'll put it somewhere around 5, maybe 6 seconds. Others higher. Can you talk about then why you think he had more time than what a lot of people think?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is when I concluded back in '93, when I first published Case Closed, that it was Oswald alone. People hear that conclusion, or they hear the two of you say that you think that Oswald killed Kennedy, and they think therefore you agree with everything the Warren Commission came to a conclusion of, and that's not at all the case. I happen to think that the Warren Commission did a weak job on investigating Jack Ruby's potential mob connections. They aren't there, but they should have made a more aggressive investigation of it at the time. They certainly got lied to by the FBI and the CIA, not because those two agencies were covering up a murder, but they were covering up their own bureaucratic behinds for a whole host of reasons. And they got the shooting sequence wrong at Dealey Plaza. The Warren Commission, in part based upon what Governor Connolly thought was the sequence, thought that the first shot hit the president and the governor, the so-called magic bullet. The second shot missed. The third shot is the headshot. And we know where the third shot is because it's clear on the Zapruder frame, the home movie of the assassination. It's at frame 313. And the film acts as a clock for you. It's 1/18th of a second for each frame. So if you work that all out, Oswald has about 5.5 seconds. Is it doable? Yes. I mean, CBS did recreations back in the mid-'60s in specials, and they had marksmen get up and shoot at a moving wooden trolley, and they hit it within that time. But it's a tough shot, and it's even a tougher shot for a guy like Oswald. It turns out that I think the overwhelming credible evidence now is that the first shot missed. I think it's about that the shooter had about 8.5 seconds. That's the time Oswald had. The bullet's already in the chamber. You've cocked it in there, so that starts the clock running when you fire the first shot. A recent reenactment and study of the ballistics by Nova, as you guys know, you discussed it, gives 11 seconds, over 11 seconds. It becomes a much easier shot at that point. You're talking about taking the first shot, you miss. You've got 3.5 to 5 seconds for the second shot, depending on how you view that clock, whether you believe Nova or you shorten it to where I think it is. And that second shot is not fatal, and then you've got that full 5 seconds for the last shot, and you just make it in.
Yeah, I want to talk about the the two bullets, the one that was found on Governor Conley's stretcher, and then the one that was found in like fragments. A lot of people will say, well, why was one in such, as they call it, the pristine bullet, why was that in such great condition? And the one that exited Kennedy's head was, just like in shards or fragments of bullets.
Yeah, I love that. They can't understand it because, in part, the Warren Commission had trouble understanding it, and that's part of the reason for the conspiracy speculation. The Warren Commission had the FBI do these recreations in which they shot a bullet like Oswald's into the side of it like a goat carcass, and it would come out all mangled and in terrible shape, and nobody could quite figure out how the one that went through the president and into Conley ended up in relatively good shape. Conspiracy theorists use the term "it's nearly pristine" or "near pristine." There's no such thing. It's like saying somebody's almost pregnant. They're either pregnant or they're not. The bullet's either pristine or it's not, and it's not pristine. I've examined it. I have an advantage over a lot of the conspiracy theorists who haven't examined it. I've been at the National Archives. I've looked at that bullet. It looks better in pictures than it looks in person, if that makes sense, because it's flattened on one side. It's compressed at the end. You can tell that it's been damaged in its flight. You're just not sure how until you see what it did and why it's different than the headshot. That bullet was fired at 2,100 feet to over 2,000 feet a second from Oswald's gun. And we know that's from Oswald's gun to the exclusion of any other rifle in the world, as you guys know. It hits Kennedy, and when it's traveling through Kennedy at that point, it's slowed up a little bit because of the fact that it's just taken that distance to reach him, but it hits him only in tissue. It doesn't hit any bone, doesn't pass through him by doing any damage to him in terms of actual bone. It exits Kennedy's throat. And it's tumbling at that point because bullets will do that when they hit anything. They can do it when they hit a twig. And the entrance, we know it's tumbling not by guesswork, but because the entrance wound into Conley's sort of high right rear shoulder is 1.25 inches long. That's the exact size, length of that bullet. So it hits him flat on. And it passes through at about 1,500 to 1,600 feet a second, let's say, and then hits the first hard thing, which is his rib. It literally shatters the fifth right rib. It's traveling sideways. It presses the bullet down. When it hits his wrist, as it comes out underneath his right nipple, it comes out through his chest. It's hitting that wrist at about 900 feet a second. That's fast enough to break the wrist, but not fast enough to deform the bullet. And then it plops, as I call it, so almost into his thigh at about 400 feet a second. So at that point, it's underneath the skin. When they get him on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital, eventually they're working him, they're moving him around, they're trying to make sure that he's not going to die. It pops out, and they later find it on the stretcher. Now, there was a time in which nobody was sure you could actually get a bullet to do all of that and emerge in his good condition. But as you know, for 20 years now, ballistics experts have been shooting bullets just like the 6.5 millimeter that Oswald shot through mock-ups of the same amount of mass as Kennedy and Conley, repeating the distance, and they can recreate that bullet all day long, essentially. And you ask about the head bullet. The head bullet, of course, goes into solid bone. It's the skull. It's a thick part of the skull at the back. That bullet does exactly what you expect it to do when it hits something on a full fly. It hasn't been slowed, deflected. It's the straight fly from the gun for 2,000 feet a second, hits the hard skull, and it shatters with fragments inside the car, fragments inside the brain, and that bullet just sort of explodes on impact against that bone.
Now, when it comes to, and I'm going to go ahead and say crazy conspiracies, how do we know that you hear a lot of people when they talk about the Kennedy assassination that the way that the skull exploded means that he had to have been shot from the front or he was shot from a different angle than what Oswald shot. I've heard crazy conspiracies all the way up from, that the driver of the limousine shot JFK.
Right. One of my favorites.
Yeah, ours too.
So how do we know that this bullet came from the back and not from the front?
Well, for a couple of reasons. The best reason that we know that is that one conspiracy theorist and author, David Liston, who I know and like, although David Liston and I could not be more diametrically opposed on conclusions on this case, had to write a book called Best Evidence to explain away the evidence, meaning that his theory was that the president's body had been sort of stolen while it was on Air Force One flying back to Bethesda for the autopsy, and that somehow surgery was done to the back of the head to make it look as though he had been shot from the rear. And then the autopsy x-rays and photos were touched and retouched and faked in addition to make it sure that it really framed Oswald. So what that means to me is that conspiracy theorists who study the case realize that the physical evidence actually shows the president was shot from the rear, and they try to explain that away by saying, well, they must have done surgery on the president's head after he was dead. They must have faked the autopsy x-rays and photos because, yeah, they do show that, but we don't really believe it. Because when you examine the autopsy x-rays and photos, which as far as I'm concerned are the best evidence, unless you can persuade me that they were faked, which the House Select Committee on Assassination studied in the late 70s and concluded there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever that they were retouched or faked. So you look at those, and they show you that on the left side of the president's head, which would be the portion in which a bullet fired from the grassy knoll or from the front, entering the president's head would have to exit or blow out. There's no crack, there's no nick, there's nothing. It's fully intact. The only portion of the skull that's not intact is the right frontal portion around the cerebral area of the right front edge of the president's head. And the reason that's not intact is there's a small hole on the rear of the skull, which shows the entrance point of the bullet, and then the right skull is blown out because of the tremendous force of that bullet coming into the skull, blowing out, there's no other way to describe this, just brain and blood matter, unfortunately, in this giant sort of spray that takes place. But I will say, and I'm sure the two of you will agree, that when a lay person watches the Zapruder film for the first time at full speed, not in slow motion, but just at full speed, the impression is the president is shot from the front, because it looks as though he's sitting in the car and you see this red splotch come up very fast, and he goes back into the left. And we've all watched, enough of 24 and Blacklist and everything else to know when somebody's shot, they go over backwards away from the bullet. And that's what it looks like here until you slow the film up. You watch it in slow motion, and you really see what's happening frame by frame.
Absolutely. So, like you mentioned, with the conspiracy theorists, and to a certain extent, all of our brains work this way, but conspiracy theorists particularly, they have the conclusion they want first, and they work backwards, and if there's any disconfirming evidence, they kind of either throw it out or try to figure out why it's not right. So let's touch on the idea of the bullets here for a second, because as you may have heard in the first hour, and there's been documentaries about this JFK, the smoking gun, I believe it was called, that the Secret Service man behind the president's limo accidentally shot his AR-15 and hit the kill shot on the president, the one that hit his head. Was there any other type of bullet found anywhere that would suggest that's the case, or have the bullets that have been found and traced back to Oswald, are those the only bullets that we know of?
The only gun that fired any bullets that hit anybody at Dealey Plaza that day came from Oswald's gun. Now, even if you're a conspiracy theorist and you want to say that a world-class assassin was using Oswald's gun, it was really a Corsican assassin or somebody else, the only person that hit anybody that day was clearly Oswald. So if there was a front shooter, if there was a grassy knoll shooter, like the House Select Committee believed because of their sound tapes, that world-class assassin was clearly put there by the conspiracy because they couldn't trust Oswald to make the shots from the rear, so they had to put the real assassin in the front. The real magic bullet at Dealey Plaza was fired from that so-called front assassin, because that front assassin missed everyone. He missed Jack Kennedy, he missed Jackie Kennedy, he missed the governor, he missed Mrs. Connolly, he missed the two Secret Service agents, he missed all the people standing on the other side of the car, he missed the car entirely. He hit nothing. So you put the person who's supposed to kill Kennedy at the grassy knoll, that shot isn't involved in the assassination. And the idea that a Secret Service agent, who did in fact grab an automatic weapon, an AR-15, as that cars were speeding out of Dealey Plaza, there's photographic evidence to show that that gun was in his hands and coming up after the president was already killed. Okay. But that has not stopped a book being written about it, and has not stopped a documentary made on Reels the other day, and I use the word documentary really loosely here.
I understand.
But what is incredible about that is you have to think, the two of you know this as skeptics, and the skeptic community knows it. You sometimes have to just apply common sense and ask the question, what would have played out if that had happened? In that car were Powers and other advisors, Dave Powers and other advisors to Jack Kennedy in that particular car. Could you imagine that if a Secret Service agent had grabbed the AR-15 and in bringing it up had fired it, and then everybody saw the president's head blow up, they would sort of look at each other and go, oops, We better not say anything.
Okay.
Let's be quiet. Oh, God, we could be in big trouble for that. Okay, let's not. Yeah, okay, no. I didn't see anything. Did you? No, I didn't see anything, Dave. Not me either. Okay. I mean, it's just ridiculous on its face, but somehow it carries this. That's because, unfortunately, in the Kennedy assassination, it's become a board game. People can say anything they want about who they think who killed Kennedy, and nobody takes offense. Even though there's a family out there who has lost a member of their family in Jack Kennedy, even though it's the death of a president, it's somehow become entertainment.
No, that's a good point.
I just have a quick question when it comes to Secret Service. I believe his name was George Hickey.
Right.
Why pick on this particular Secret Serviceman, and has he actually ever made a response to these wild accusations on him?
Yes, as a matter of fact, because he's the one who had the bad luck of grabbing the automatic weapon that had been in that car and bringing it up, and he did. I know the lawyer that represented him, writer of the original book. Several years after it was published, they got what they thought was the equivalent of an apology, the best they're going to get from a publisher, not admitting too much because they're afraid of opening them up to a lawsuit. And that was the end of it. It would never come back. He's since passed away, but then this year Reels resurrected it, thinking that it was a clever idea. And, there are a few theories that are worse. I think the accidental shooting by a Secret Service agent behind is something that's dismissible on his face because of photographic evidence that shows it's not possible. But still, that hasn't stopped it from making the rounds. There's also, as you know, one of our favorites is we just said that the driver of the car,
right.
George Greer, turned around and there's a glint of light that makes it look as though he's holding metal in his hand. So he just shot JFK in the headshot with a small revolver and then turned around and drove off. Nobody in the rest of the car saw that or said anything. It was a complete mystery. So there are those certain moments at which you're just sort of, slack-jawed that it could become a theory, but nothing surprises me in this case. I lived long enough to see Oliver Stone resurrect one of the most discredited theories around, that of Jim Garrison, the late district attorney of New Orleans, who just made it up as he went along. He just happened to be really dangerous because as opposed to just being a conspiracy theorist with a wild idea, he was a district attorney who had the ability to ruin people's lives, and he did. And although he's been thoroughly discredited, Stone needed a hero in his film. You always love somebody chasing the truth.
Sure.
So he, you talk about a perversion of the truth. It's hard to imagine anything wackier than Kevin Costner playing Jim Garrison.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Jim Garrison as a guy who, during this investigation, nearly numerology he was using at one point to try to link Ruby and Oswald, like using Ruby's P.O. box, I think it was. Changing numbers, adding numbers to make it look like Oswald's unlisted phone number. Just insanity.
It's really true. It's hard to go beyond Garrison. To think of how bad it was. At one point, he had it as, although he would have called it a homosexual thrill killing, a gay kill thrilling. He thought that was a connection to it. Over time, he had a dozen different shooters at Dealey Plaza. He's one of my favorites, Garrison, because he had for a short while, until he was disabused of the notion, a shooter in the sewer. So he thought that it was a shooter was in the sewer, wasn't sure if that shooter had actually made the headshot, but as the car came by, then he sent an investigator to Dallas to go in that manhole cover along the street near Elm Street and found out that you had to be like 4'10" to fit in. It was a tiny little entrance, so he abandoned that idea at that point, unless he found a midget assassin.
So we're talking to Gerald Posner. The book that is forming the crux of our conversation is Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Assassination of JFK, and encourage you to check out Gerald Posner's website. His website's www.posner.com. That's POSNER.com. So, Gerald, I wanted to ask you about, for me, when it comes to the JFK assassination, the killing of Officer Tippit is really, I think, there's no other reason for Oswald to shoot Tippit or even to go on and assault the officer in the theater if he didn't have something to do with it, if he wasn't trying to, escape somehow. So let's talk about that a little bit. So Oswald shoots Kennedy. He leaves the Texas School Book Depository. As far as I understand, he was the only employee to be unaccounted for afterwards.
Right.
So there's no real reason for that other than maybe you have something to hide, maybe, unless you stopped off for lunch or whatever, but I don't think that was the case. But then eventually he kills an officer. Can we start there? What happened that day?
Yeah, and just if I can, just for half a second before getting to Tippett, you said something very interesting. It's okay. I know, Jason, you are into politics, and Bobby, you understand. You're studying psychology, so you'll both get this completely. Right. Oswald is the only person missing from the employee lineup done at the Texas School Book Depository 45 minutes after the assassination. When he was later asked about that, why he wasn't there, he told the police, I heard the president had been shot, so I thought, we must have the rest of the day off. So I just left. Now, knowing Oswald, that's the last thing he would do. Oswald was, no matter what you thought of him, immersed in politics. Whether you thought he was really a pro-Castro advocate or you thought he was really an anti-Castro advocate who was pretending to be pro-Castro, whether he was still a communist like he was when he went to Russia or had since become sort of soured on communism, he was on the streets of New Orleans handing out his pro-Castro leaflets. This is a guy who lived, breathed. He tried to kill Edwin Walker because he thought he was a right-wing threat. So the Lee Harvey Oswald that I came to understand is somebody who, if he had been innocent of this crime and had heard that the president had been shot in front of the place that he worked, he would have been out in Dealey Plaza asking what happened. He would have been talking to people. He would have been soaking up that atmosphere. So the idea that Oswald would just say, day off, fantastic. And then what does he do when he has his day off? Well, first of all, as you guys know, he gets on a bus to go back to his boarding house, but the bus is slow, so he then gets in a taxi. And to your listeners, that may sound like no big deal, but Lee Harvey Oswald had very little money. He was notoriously tight. It's the first taxi we ever know that he took in 24 years. He just turned 24 years old. So to get in a taxi is a pretty extraordinary sign that he's in a rush. Gets back to his boarding house, takes his jacket and his .38 caliber revolver. That's always what you do when you have a day off. Right. And then at around 1:15 or so, he's walking along Oak Cliff, and J.D. Tippett, who's just a regular Dallas patrolman, who had been ordered to drive into Oak Cliff, saw Oswald. I think it was like along 10th Street, and there had been an all-points bulletin put out for the presidential assassin based upon an eyewitness, this Brennan, who had been a construction worker. It's a general description, but it sounds like Oswald. It could be 20s, white, medium brown hair. And he called Oswald over. Now, what's interesting about that is Tippett did not, at that time, call in his radio that he had stopped someone, and he didn't draw his gun on exiting the car. So according to Dallas police procedures, that meant that he only thought the person he was stopping was suspicious. You only call it in if you're positive you found a suspect. And as he starts to come around the front left tire, Oswald whips out that revolver and starts shooting. And what's amazing about that is he empties the gun. Those bullets, the 5-6 shots point blank at Tippett, are tied to Oswald's revolver that he had ordered that January to the exclusion of any gun in the world. And there are eyewitnesses all over that identify Oswald as the shooter. And as you said before, it's the absolute indication to me at that point that whether you want to say Oswald's the shooter, or he just brought the rifle to the depository, or he just knew somebody, he was involved in the assassination. To say he's a patsy, the Tippett murder blows that out the window.
No, absolutely. And going further, then, where does Oswald go after he kills Tippett? Where does his path lead us to?
Well, the part of Oswald's departure is we don't know where he was intending to go. So nobody's quite sure where he was heading at that point. And the one thing that we know absolutely true is that the Tippett murder throws him off completely, because at this point he clearly doesn't intend to run into Tippett. The Tippett confrontation leads to his arrest because he runs through a gas station. He's heading down this street, Jefferson, and within a few minutes there are police squads speeding along Jefferson toward the site of the murder. So Oswald would hear those sirens, and he sort of ducks into what I call the front of this store, a shoe store, Hardy Shoe Store.
Okay.
And there's a guy inside. This is the great thing about life. No conspiracy, nothing else. It's just the way real life plays out. The fellow inside the store, who was the store manager, was listening to radio reports about JFK's assassination, and he looks up and he sees this guy, Oswald, who looks a little odd in there. His hair's like a mess, and he's like screwed up. He looks a little nervous and funny. He's standing and staring, and then when he walks out, Brewer, who's the store manager, follows him. And about 150 feet, Oswald ducks into the Texas Theater, a nearby movie theater, And Brewer follows him, sees that, asked the girl selling the tickets in the front if he had paid, and she didn't even see him go in. And they called the cops, and a few minutes later he was arrested.
Yeah, and he assaults the first officer that approaches him. He has his weapon, of course, still with him. He assaults the officer. Again, this is more evidence to, if this guy's completely innocent or he has nothing to do with anything, why is he, A, why does he shoot Tippett? But then B, of course, why does he, assault an officer? Why does he pull his gun? It doesn't make any sense unless he has something to do with it.
Now, okay, so here's the conspiracy explanation for it. The conspiracy explanation of that is, okay, Tippett was the guy sent to silence him because Oswald knew something. He wasn't the shooter. He was being set up as a patsy, and the minute the assassination took place, he thought, oh, my goodness, these guys are setting me up. All right, so he runs from the depository, and then Tippett is the hitman sent to do it, and Oswald turns the table on him and shoots him. So that's the entire thing. Now, what's great about this theory, when you hear that, is, again, it comes back to the common sense idea. Let's say that the three of us were plotting the assassination. And obviously we've done a really good job because 50 years later, it's fooling the three of us and it's fooling a lot of other people. It's the perfect crime. People are suspicious, but they can't really prove who did it. So we pulled it off. Now, what are we going to do with Oswald? We're going to make sure that if Oswald is truly a patsy and doesn't know anything, we're not going to do a thing about him because then it's like a 900-pound train hits him, runs over him at 900 miles an hour. He won't know what hit him. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison or he'll be executed, and that'll be the end of Oswald. So he goes away. You only have to kill him if he knows something. Yeah. He's got to have some element that he can pin. So what we would do if we were planning it, I think, we'd kill him at Dealey Plaza. We'd have a dirty cop find him on the way leaving the depository. He would challenge him. Oswald would do something odd. He would kill him there, and that cop would receive a medal for having shot the assassin at the scene.
I think so.
But instead, somehow we've missed it because Oswald walked out the front of the building. He didn't walk out the rear. So they say, oh, you must have had the hitman at the rear. Oswald gave you the fake by walking out the front. Okay, so he gives us the fake. Tippett's sent to kill him. Oswald kills Tippett. Well, if that's true, we now know there's a higher risk of Oswald talking than ever before. We just try to kill him.
Yeah.
And he's killed our assassin. But so what do? We call in Jack Ruby. He's a great guy, and we say, Jack, you've got the biggest assignment of your life. You got to go down to the police station and make sure that Oswald's dead because he could blow the entire conspiracy. And Jack goes down there on Friday night and does what he's good at. He's handing out his business cards. He's glad-handing. He's offering people pizzas. He's got his gun with him. There's a picture taken from the rear of him. You can see the bump as he always has his pistol with him. Forget about talking about Dallas police security. It was terrible. But Jack is there doing what he does. He puts himself in the middle of the action. Oswald's taken out for this midnight press conference. He walks like a few feet away from Ruby. And Jack must think to himself, hey, I know I was given this big assignment, the biggest of my life. It could make me a big guy, but I'm not in the mood to kill him tonight. Maybe tomorrow. And then on Saturday, he's down hanging out at the police station again, and Oswald's taken out of the office again and walks near Ruby. There's a film by a local Dallas TV station, and Ruby must not be in the mood again. And on Sunday, there's no evidence that any mobsters or anybody from the CIA call Ruby up and say, by the way, Jack, what are you doing? You've got an assignment to kill him. He's sending a MoneyGram to a stripper of his who needs $25. He's got his dog in his car. He wanders down to the police station. Oswald's an hour late from leaving because he's asked for a change of clothes, and a postal inspector arrived to interrogate him. And Jack walks down the runway, and it just gets there as Oswald's walking out. It just doesn't make any sense. No. But people will hold on to that idea as though that's the entire elaborate conspiracy to silence Oswald. There's just common sense is missing.
Yeah, but we know that Tippett had something to do with it because his car number, if you divide it by 1.5 and times it by... it's
that's
Lee
right.
Harvey Oswald's illicit number or whatever, I don't know.
Well, but think of, okay, you both are good at realizing the danger of coincidence, so that if tomorrow the president was killed here in the U.S. by, let's say, a former SEAL or a former Army Ranger or that, it really would raise the idea, is that person doing it as part of, related to their military service, or is it independent of that? Mm. If the person that killed the president tomorrow brother was an FBI agent, does that mean that there's some connection to the Bureau or anything like that? Now, if Tippett's brother had worked for the FBI, or Tippett had a sister who worked for the CIA, or anything like that, you would be off and running on 20 other conspiracy theories right now. It just happened that he didn't. But by coincidence, if he had, forget about it. It would have been times 10.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, I mean, do you think this will ever go away? I mean, we were talking earlier, 50th anniversary coming up, 50 years from now. I don't think I'll be alive then, but I'm almost sure that there'll still be a sizable portion of the population that will still be obsessed with this and still think that it was some larger conspiracy than it was. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, look, I guess that I'm confident when I say the title "Case Closed," but I also know that it's a very hopeful title because on this particular case, it's very unlikely to be closed for many Americans or most Americans. I think it continues to bounce along as a conspiracy, in large part, because people hold on to the belief, have not examined the evidence, and also because there are so many falsehoods. The belief that more than 100 witnesses who saw something mysterious died a mysterious death in the years following the assassination, false. The idea of what you mentioned before, that somebody couldn't make the shots, false. Yeah. The idea that Ruby was a mobster and therefore was tied up to the mob and was a serious hoodlum, false. So, these types of things just continue to persist, and they're repeated so many times that eventually they become accepted as truths, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. Well, Mr. Posner, I have to thank you for coming on the show tonight. We're just about out of time here with you. Again, check out Gerald's website. It's www.posner.com. That's Posner. Don't go into the the wrong information that Case Closed is his only book. He's written books about Ross Perot, Joseph Mengele, even 9/11. Obviously, an award-winning investigative journalist. So, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great pleasure to speak with you and talk about this issue, yes. And really appreciate your insight into this obviously very important story.
And it's great to talk to the two of you. I mean, between Bobby's understanding of psychology or study of it, and so therefore he can really get into Oswald and the why of Oswald, and Jason with you on politics, so that once I get two people between psychology and politics that are both skeptics, I know that I've got a chance of having a common sense discussion. So it's really a treat.
I appreciate that, sir. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye bye.
All right. So again, Gerald Posner, the book "Case Closed." Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassination of JFK. Great guy, great discussion.
Every time I talk to somebody of that caliber, I always go, "It's the best episode of this show we've ever had."
It was pretty cool.
I'm going to have to say that's up there with one of my top 3 favorite shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was phenomenal.
Just as far as I'm always hesitant to say encyclopedic knowledge, but as close as I know to someone who has an encyclopedic, or that way I've ever spoken to anyway, encyclopedic knowledge of the assassination.
It was like the Bob Price of JFK assassination information.
Where we've had biblical scholars and that they can come on and talk about.
It's like a photographic memory of the Bible,
almost.
And this guy was Gerald Posner was just phenomenal.
No, it's fantastic. So again, don't be misled that he's only written about Kennedy. He's written about Martin Luther King and just the assassination of Martin Luther King. So again, the website Posner. That's Posner.com. Check that out. So I'm glad we finally did a show devoted to the JFK assassination.
People don't realize this. We've been talking about doing this show for literally 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're coming up on our 5th year of doing this show, and while we've talked about the JFK assassination a number of times, we've never had a guest, or we've never devoted a segment or whatever to specifically talking about that.
But we started discussing this seriously about doing the JFK show maybe about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
You're like, look, the 50th anniversary is coming up, we got to do a show. And we were actually, at first, a little... We didn't know which way we wanted to go. Did we want to get a conspiracy theorist on here to explain to us why they didn't? But then we were like, no, we both believe that Oswald acted alone.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought that, look, the 50th anniversary is coming up. The conspiracy theorists have had their say.
Yeah, they've had their heyday.
And they're going to continue on anyway. But, it's we need to have somebody on who knows what the hell he's talking about and who, we're confident in that can come on. Now, we went through a variety of people. I mean, there was even a time where we thought we're going to have to do this show by ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we didn't have to. I mean, I think we would have been able to do it, but it's much better when we have somebody like Gerald Posner coming on who has, like I said, just about an encyclopedic knowledge of the assassination and can kick over the many conspiracy theories that have come after it. We went through. I mean, we were emailing people left and right, but it had to be a specific type of person. It had to be somebody who knows what they're talking about, has either written about the assassination, or somebody that we knew had a firm knowledge base about the assassination.
We can go over. We tried to get Michael Shermer.
We tried to get Michael Shermer. We tried to get Bob Blazkowicz, the FI conspiracy guy. We were even trying to get Vincent Bugliosi. I mean, there were some people that have been recommended to us before that we emailed. Some of them, one or two of them we did. Some we didn't, just because we weren't confident enough in them. We didn't know enough about them.
And then we were really scared. Like, okay, but what if we find some guy that's like really good in the JFK assassination area, but like has like a collection of alien figurines from Roswell?
I was scared at one point. I thought, what if, like, in the middle of the conversation, because I wanted to be able to, I always use the word vet. I wanted to look at the person and say, this person's not a crackpot. We're not going to talk about the JFK assassination. At the end, he's going to say, but actually, I think it was but Kennedy. Kennedy may have been shot by Oswald, but he also knew about aliens at Roswell or whatever, and then we'll get into all that. So I didn't want that to happen.
Right.
We finally emailed a guy, and I don't know how to say his name for sure, but I think it's David Von Pine.
I think that's
I think it's close. Pine, but I'm not positive. We emailed him
because he has his blogs on JFK assassination is just humongous.
Yeah, he very voluminous amount of blogs related to JFK. We emailed him. He said, "Look, I'm not important enough to do the show," and I thought, we're not important enough to even have a show. Okay, we're nobodies.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not, we're not having, expertise in anything. But, but he gave us a couple names, and one of the names he gave us was Posner's.
And and then I'm smacking myself because I run into my library. It's like, I have his book.
So it was completely our fault that we didn't even think of him at first. But thanks to David Von Pine, who we'll have to email now and explain to him, to thank him for recommending him. It's not that we didn't know him. It's just that I think along the way of thinking about people, thinking about who we were going to get, we just kind of thought like, Bugliosi's not going to do the show. These writers, these journalists, they're not going to do the show. It's a short notice and all that. Yeah. And we were getting really down to the wire here. So I think it was Wednesday or Thursday or something like that.
It was Wednesday, I believe. Yeah. I emailed Mr. Posner. And he has travels tomorrow. This is why we did the show tonight, which I hope he has safe travels.
Yeah, safe travels to him, sure.
And I'd like to just thank them again for such short notice.
Absolutely, yeah.
Coming on the show.
Very appreciative for his.
It was a phenomenal show.
I really enjoyed speaking to him.
And again, his book is Case Closed: Lee Harvey Oswald and the Assassination of JFK.
See, now I need the book. I don't actually have a copy of the book, but now I need the book, and I have a feeling that a lot of other people that are listening to this need the book now too. I mean, if you listen to him talk about it, you want to read more about it, and I'm buying the book. That's all there is to it. So, fascinating stuff.